The halls of the Interstellar Academy were never quiet. They hummed with the low vibrations of a dozen different languages and the soft tap and shuffle of various feet, claws, and other appendages. Park J walked through this chaos with a calm that felt like a separate bubble around him. He was a new instructor, and today was his first day. He was a human man in his late 40s. His black hair was streaked with a little gray, and his face was calm. He wore the simple dark blue instructor's uniform without any extra marks or badges. In his hand was a plain data slate. He looked like any other teacher. He arrived at Door 7 Gamma, the room for his class. Interspecies Conflict Mediation, Foundational Concepts. He took a breath and opened the door. The room was a wide half-circle. Desks rose in levels, facing a central teaching platform. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, a mix of the different atmospheres preferred by his students. About 20 beings filled the seats. Jay's eyes quickly scanned the room. There were 3 Croth near the back. They were large, with thick gray skin and broad shoulders. They wore military-style uniforms of their own. They talked in low, rough voices and did not look up when he entered. Everyone knew the Croth were a warrior species. They valued strength above all. To the left were 2 Lumine. Their bodies seemed to be made of soft, shifting light. They communicated without sound, their forms flickering gently. They were known as thinkers and telepaths, very logical. A group of Helionites sat neatly in the middle. They had many delicate arms and large, dark eyes. They were bureaucrats, lovers of rules and procedures. They were already organizing their note-taking devices. And then there were the humans. Only 2. A young woman with sharp, observant eyes named Kim Minji. She sat straight, her hands folded on the desk. Next to her, a young man named Li Huan was looking at a small engineering schematic on his wrist device. He seemed more interested in machines than people. Jay walked to the center of the platform. The room grew quiet, but it was a polite, waiting quiet. He could feel their eyes on him. The Croth looked briefly at him, then away, as if he was not important. The Lumine's light pulsed slowly. The Helionites had all their eyes focused on him, ready to record. "Good morning," Jay said. His voice was even and clear, carried without being loud. "I am Instructor Park J. This is Interspecies Conflict Mediation. You may call me Instructor Park." He placed his data slate on the podium but did not look at it. This class is not about who is stronger or who is smarter. It is not about winning a fight. It is about stopping the fight before it begins. It is about understanding why conflicts happen and finding a path where no one loses everything. One of the Croth, the largest, made a low sound. It was almost a chuckle. Jay pretended not to hear it. "We will start with a simple idea," Jay continued. He tapped his slate, and a single word appeared in the air behind him. Restraint. What is restraint? It is a choice. It is the choice not to use your full power even when you can. It is the choice to listen when you want to shout. It is the choice to stand still when you want to attack. Li Huan, the human engineer, raised a hand. "Instructor, how can restraint be a strength? If you have power and do not use it, others will think you are weak. They will take advantage." He glanced quickly at the Croth in the back. Jay nodded. "A good question, Mr. Li. The galaxy often makes that mistake. They see the clenched fist but not the open hand that chose not to make a fist. Restraint is not the absence of strength. It is the control of strength. It is harder to control strength than to simply use it. Any being can break something. It takes will to prevent the break." He saw Minji writing notes. The Helionites were recording every word. The Lumine glowed with interest. "For our first exercise," Jay said, "I want you to pair up with someone not of your own species. You will have a simple task. One of you will want a light on. The other will want a light off. You have 5 minutes to talk and find a solution that does not involve force, commands, or threats." The students began to move. The noise rose again. Jay stepped down from the platform and walked slowly among the desks. He listened. He heard the Croth cadet, the large one who had chuckled, paired with a Helionite. The Croth's voice was firm. "The light should be off. It saves energy. This is logical. The Helionite waved its thin arms. But the rules for classroom interaction suggest optimal lighting for all species. The light should be at 50%. It was not a discussion. It was two beings stating their own rules. He passed Minji, who was paired with a Lumine. They were speaking softly. My people find bright light uncomfortable. The Lumine pulsed gently. I understand, Minji said. Perhaps we can direct the light away from you, or use a different color spectrum. Their conversation was going better. After 5 minutes, Jay called them back to attention. He asked a few pairs to share their solutions. Most were simple compromises. Half the time with light, half without. A shared schedule. The large Croth cadet spoke without being asked. His name was Vorin AK, but Jay thought of him simply as the Croth cadet. We agreed the light off is better, the Croth said, looking at the Helionite. The Helionite's many arms fluttered slightly, but it said, the Croth cadet's point about energy efficiency has merit under subsection B of Academy guidelines. Jay simply nodded. He did not correct them. He did not praise them. He just said, thank you. Note how different cultures value different things. Logic, rules, comfort. The first step is to see what the other values. The class period was almost over. Jay returned to the platform. For next time, he said, think about this. What is something you want very much but you would give up to prevent a larger conflict? You do not need to write it down. Just think. The students began to gather their things. The Croth left quickly, talking among themselves. The Lumine drifted out. The Helionites moved in an orderly line. Minji and Juan were the last to leave. Juan shook his head. They don't get it, Instructor. They think this is a game. Minji was more thoughtful. The Lumine was interesting. It thinks so differently. Jay gave them a small smile. Understanding takes time, he said. Go on. I will see you next class. He watched them go. The room was empty now, silent except for the ever-present hum of the academy. He looked at the word restraint still glowing in the air. He tapped his slate and it vanished. He picked up his own simple bag. Inside, next to his data slates, was a long, narrow object wrapped in a dark cloth. He did not touch it. He just closed the bag. The galaxy saw a simple classroom. They saw a human teacher with a calm face talking about peace. They saw young species learning to be polite. Park J left the room, turning off the light as he went. He walked back into the noisy hall, just another instructor in a sea of alien faces. No one noticed him at all. And that, for now, was exactly how he wanted it. The next week, the classroom felt different. The students now knew the space, and they had chosen their seats with more purpose. The Croth cadets sat together like a solid wall of gray. The Helionites were in their perfect rows. Kim Minji and Li Huan sat closer to the front. The air held a sense of waiting. Instructor Park J began the class as he always did, with a quiet nod. He did not smile, but his face was not unfriendly. It was neutral, like a calm lake. Last time we spoke of restraint, Jay said. Today we put theory into practice. We will run a simulation. A low murmur went through the room. The Croth cadets sat up a little straighter. Simulations were something they understood. Jay activated the room's holographic projectors. The familiar desks faded, replaced by a rocky, orange landscape under a purple sky. In the center of the vision was a simple structure, a water pumping station. This is the scenario, Jay explained, his voice cutting through the alien scenery. 2 groups claim this water station. Group Alpha, he said, and a blue symbol appeared over the station, has maintained it for years. They say their work gives them the right to control it. Group Beta, a red symbol flashed, lives closer to the water source. They say the water is a gift of their land, and they need more of it to survive. You are the mediation team. Your goal is to find a solution that prevents violence. He divided the class into 2 teams. One team would play Group Alpha, the defenders of the station. The other would be Group Beta, the claimants. A third, smaller group would be the mediators who would listen and propose solutions. Minji was placed as a lead mediator. Juan was on Group Beta, the claimant team. The large Croth cadet, Voronake, was placed as the leader of Group Alpha, the defenders. Jay saw a flicker of satisfaction on the Croth's stony face. Defending a position was a role of strength. The simulation began. The teams huddled, discussing their arguments. Juan, representing the people who needed water, argued passionately about survival. Without more water, our families will suffer. It is a basic need. His team, which included a Helionite and a Lumine, agreed. On the other side, the Croth cadet's voice was firm and loud. We built the controls. We fixed the pipes. Our effort made this resource usable. Effort creates right. We decide the flow. Minji, as the lead mediator, called for the first joint discussion. She was careful and polite. Group Beta, can you detail your exact need? Group Alpha, can you explain the maintenance schedule? Perhaps there is a way to share the workload and the water. Juan presented a plan for a new pipe, a direct line that would give his group more water without hurting the station. He had even drawn up quick engineering specs. It was a good, practical idea. The Croth cadet looked at the plans. He did not address Juan. He looked at Minji. Their proposed construction would weaken the foundation of our station. It is an unacceptable risk. The answer is no. Juan flushed. But the scans show the foundation would be fine. I've checked the soil density. The simulation parameters state that Group Alpha has superior knowledge of the station's integrity. The Croth cadet stated, a hint of triumph in his voice. He was using the rules of the exercise as his shield. Our assessment is final. No new pipe. The debate went back and forth. Minji tried to find other compromises, different schedules, shared oversight. Each time, the Croth cadet found a reason to say no. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was just immovable, using his assigned role's authority to block every idea. Jay watched silently from the edge of the holographic landscape. He saw Juan's frustration growing. He saw Minji's polite determination starting to fray. He saw the other alien students in the groups just following the strongest voice. Finally, the simulation time ended. No solution had been found. The mediators were forced to make a ruling. Minji, looking strained, said, without agreement, and with Group Alpha's control being the current status, the station remains under Group Alpha's full control. But we strongly recommend a future review of water allocation. It was a diplomatic failure. The status quo won. The Croth cadet gave a single, slow nod. He had not yielded an inch. He had won. The holograms faded, leaving the normal classroom. The students were quiet. Juan looked down at his desk, his jaw tight. Minji looked unhappy. Jay walked to the center of the room. A common result, he said, his voice still calm. The side with perceived control holds fast. The side in need is denied. The mediators follow the clearest rule, the rule of current ownership. He looked at the Croth cadet. Cadet, you defended your position perfectly. You gave no ground. By the strict rules of the simulation, you succeeded. The Croth cadet met his gaze, a confident gleam in his eye. However, Jay continued, turning to the whole class, what happens after this ruling? Group Beta is still thirsty. Their need has not vanished. Their frustration has grown. What do they do now? When peaceful mediation leads to a dead end, what paths remain? The room was very still. The unspoken answer hung in the air. Violence, rebellion, theft. This is the danger of a victory that only serves one side, Jay said. It is not peace. It is a delayed conflict. True restraint sometimes means the powerful side gives up a little so that both sides can live, so that the conflict truly ends. The Croth cadet's expression darkened slightly. He saw the lesson as a criticism of his win. The class ended soon after. The students filed out. Juan rushed up to Jay, his frustration bubbling over. It wasn't fair, Instructor. He just kept saying no. He didn't even consider my plans. Minji joined him, more measured but equally troubled. I didn't know how to proceed. Every tool I used, he blocked. Jay listened, then spoke quietly. You both did your jobs correctly. He did his job correctly as he understood it. Remember this feeling. This is the seed of a longer, colder war. Some seeds grow in silence. Juan and Minji left, still talking in low, frustrated voices. Jay stood alone in the empty room. He looked at the spot where the holographic water station had been. He thought of dry earth and stubborn walls. The Croth cadet had learned to stand like a fortress. Jay's next lesson would have to teach about the quiet, persistent drip of water that, over time, can wear down even stone. But for now, the students only understood the strength of the wall. They had not yet learned the strength of the river. A week passed. The memory of the failed simulation hung in the classroom like a faint smell. When the students filed in, the usual chatter was softer. Kim Minji took her seat with a more determined look. Li Huan seemed thoughtful, less angry than before. The Croth cadet, Voron AK, sat with his usual solid posture, but his eyes watched Instructor Park Jae with a new, sharper attention. He was waiting for a challenge, a direct lesson about his victory. Jay did not give him one. Instead, when class began, Jay activated the main display. It showed a simple title historical case study, The Divided Peninsula. The best lessons are often old ones, Jay began. Today, we look at a conflict from Earth's history, but we will look at it as if it were a galactic parable. The names and places are not important. The patterns are. The display showed a map of a rugged, mountainous peninsula. It was split almost in half by a clear, straight line. Two groups on one peninsula, Jay explained. They shared a long history and culture, but after a great war among the stars, among larger nations, they were divided. The North controlled one side. The South controlled the other. Each was supported by powerful outside forces. The students listened. A history lesson was safe. It was just facts. For 3 years, a terrible war raged, Jay continued. Images of frozen landscapes, soldiers in old-fashioned uniforms, and devastated villages flashed on the screen. The Croth cadet leaned forward slightly. This was a language he understood, war. The fighting was brutal, Jay said, his voice still even. It pushed up and down the peninsula. Cities were destroyed. Many, many lives were lost. But then, something changed. The fighting reached a point where neither side could push the other off completely. They were stuck. So, they agreed to talk. The image changed to a simple, lonely-looking collection of low buildings in a barren area. They met here, Jay said, in a place that was almost no place at all. A village of no importance. They called it the Peace Village. A soft snort came from the Croth cadet. Jay pretended not to hear. For 2 years, Jay said, the soldiers fought on the battlefield. And for those same 2 years, their diplomats fought in this village. But their weapons were words. Their strategy was patience. Their goal was not to win the war, but to stop it. Li Huan raised his hand. But if no one was winning the war, why was it so hard to stop it? It sounds logical to just stop. Jay gave a small, sad smile. Because stopping meant admitting that all the pain and death had not led to victory. It meant compromise. And compromise feels like loss to those who have bled. Every day at the Peace Village, they would argue over a single word in a document. They would argue over where the exact line on the map should go. They would argue over who should guard that line. He zoomed in on the map on the dividing line. They finally agreed on this. An armistice line. Not a border of peace, but a line where the fighting would stop. And along this line, they created a demilitarized zone. A wide strip of land where no soldiers could go, filled only with watchposts and wire. Minji was writing quickly. So the war ended? No, Jay said softly. The word hung in the quiet room. It did not end. It was paused. By an agreement. Piece of paper. For decades, that line has held. Not because everyone is happy. Not because the problem is solved. But because the cost of crossing that line became too high for either side to bear. He turned off the display and looked at the class. This is our case study. I want you to discuss in small groups. What was the real weapon here? Was it the soldiers' guns during the war? Or was it the diplomats' will during the 2 years of talks? What kept the peace after the shooting stopped? The students broke into groups. The discussion was more engaged than before. The Croth cadet was in a group with 2 Helionites. The soldier's strength created the stalemate, the Croth stated firmly. Without the fight, there is no reason to talk. Strength forces the conversation. Ah, said one Helionite. But the procedural framework of the talks, the rules of negotiation, that is what channeled the conflict into a non-violent arena. In another group, Minji was talking with a Lumine. The Lumine's light pulsed slowly. The true weapon was the shared understanding of future pain. It communicated directly into her mind. A strange, cool feeling. They could both imagine the next war, and did not want it. It was a threat of a return to suffering. Juan was with another human student from a different class. It was the line, Juan said, thinking aloud. That demilitarized zone is like a circuit breaker. It physically stops the fighting from starting up again by accident. Jay walked between the groups, listening. He stopped near the Croth's group. The cadet looked up at him. Instructor, the Croth said. This story, it is a story of failure. They fought to a draw. There was no victor. Jay held his gaze. Is a draw worse than total destruction for both sides? They chose a permanent draw over mutual ruin. They chose a tense peace over a certain end. What does that require? The Croth cadet thought. It requires discipline. To stand at a line and not cross it when your enemy is right there. Jay gave a single, slow nod. Yes, it requires a different kind of strength. The strength to stand still. When the groups shared their conclusions, the answers were varied. Strength, rules, fear, barriers. Jay wrote each one on the board without comment. At the end of class, he gave them their assignment. For next time, he said, I want you to think of one thing. What is the demilitarized zone in your own life? What is the line you will not cross? Even when you are very angry or very afraid, you do not need to tell anyone. Just know what it is. The students left the strange Earth story sitting with them. It was not exciting like a battle. It was uneasy, unfinished, felt more real. The Croth cadet walked out slowly. He was not thinking of victory anymore. He was thinking of a line and of standing still. He did not understand it yet, but he was no longer dismissing it. Alone in the classroom, Jay looked at the blank board. He had not told them the real names. He had not said Korea or Panmunjom. He had not mentioned the unending technical state of war that persisted for generations. Some truths were too heavy to give all at once. You had to start with the shape of the story, the shadow of the lesson. The steel in this lesson was not in a blade, but in a line on a map, a line drawn not in ink, but in the unwavering will to endure an imperfect peace. The galaxy thought it was just a history lesson. They did not know they were being shown the blueprint of a human heart. The Interstellar Academy was not just classrooms and lectures. Part of the training involved field exercises. These were meant to teach practical skills in neutral settings. The next week, Jay's class was scheduled for one such exercise in Sector 7, a derelict ore processing station that floated in a quiet part of space. It was a maze of old metal corridors and silent control rooms, perfect for simulation drills. The students assembled in the station's main docking bay, wearing simple environment suits. The suits were not for vacuum, the station had air, but for basic protection and communication. Kim Minji checked her seals carefully. Li Huan was already tinkering with his suit's comms unit, trying to boost the signal. The alien students moved in their own groups. The Croth cadet, Vorane K, and his 2 companions looked like armored statues, their suits bulkier, more martial. Instructor Park J stood before them, his own suit a plain, standard issue. Today's exercise is simple, he said, his voice clear in their helmet comms. You will navigate in pairs to a marked control room. There, you will find a simulated system failure. Your task is to diagnose it and agree on a repair protocol with your partner. The lesson is collaborative problem-solving under minor stress. Remember your training. Communicate clearly. The pairs were assigned by the Academy computer. By chance, or perhaps not, Minji was paired with one of the younger Croth cadets, a silent one named Krell. Juan was paired with a Helionite. Jay noted that the lead Croth cadet, Voronake, was paired with a Lumine. An interesting match of blunt force and subtle thought. "Begin," Jay said. "I will be monitoring from the central control walkway. Use your channel if there is an emergency." The pairs moved off into the shadowy, green-lit corridors of the dead station. Jay made his way up a grated staircase to an elevated walkway that overlooked a large, multi-level processing chamber. From here, he could see several of the main corridors converge. His job was to observe. For a while, the comms channel was filled with routine chatter. Juan and the Helionite were debating circuit diagrams. The Lumine was patiently explaining its perception of a power flow to the Croth cadet, who responded with short, grunted acknowledgments. Then, Minji's voice came through, calm but tense. "Krell, the manual says we need to bypass the primary regulator. Your tool is better for the housing. Can you loosen the bracket?" A moment of silence. Then Krell's rough voice. "I will do it. Move back." Jay watched on a sensor map as their blinking dots moved in one of the side chambers. He saw the dot representing the lead Croth cadet, Voronake, break away from his assigned area and begin moving, slowly and deliberately, toward that same side chamber. Jay's eyes narrowed slightly. In the chamber, Minji was holding a light while Cadet Krell worked on a large, fake control panel. The Croth was using a multi-tool that functioned as both a wrench and a low-powered plasma cutter for slicing through hardened seals. It was a standard tool but powerful. "Almost there," Krell muttered. He applied torque to a final bolt. At that moment, Voronake appeared in the chamber doorway. "Cadet Krell." His voice boomed over the open channel. "Report on your progress." He stepped inside, his large form blocking the light from the corridor. Minji turned, surprised. "We are almost finished, Cadet Voronake. Is there a problem?" "I am assessing all teams," Voronake said, his tone neutral. He walked closer, looking at the panel. His own tool, identical to Krell's, was in his hand. As he leaned in to inspect the work, his arm brushed against a conduit. Then it happened. A sharp, loud crack echoed in the chamber. A bolt of bright blue plasma shot from the tip of Voronake's tool. It was not aimed directly at Minji, but it struck the metal wall a hand's breadth from her helmet. The impact was violent, spattering molten metal and sending a shower of white sparks across her visor and suit shoulder. Minji cried out, staggering back and hitting the wall. Alarms chirped in her helmet, a proximity alert and a minor suit integrity warning. The smell of ozone and burned metal filled the small room. On the comms, chaos erupted. "What was that? Suit alarm. Who fired?" Jay's voice cut through, calm but immediate. Silence on the channel. "Minji, report your status." Minji's breathing was fast, but her voice was controlled. "I am okay. Suit is intact. No injury. A plasma discharge hit the wall next to me. It was an accident." She emphasized the last word. Voronake stood still, his tool now lowered. "A malfunction," he said, his voice hard. "The tool's safety override failed. My apologies, Cadet Kim." The apology was correct in form, but it sounded hollow, like something read from a manual. The other students began to gather at the chamber entrance, their faces visible through their visors. Juan's was angry, the Helionite's was shocked. The Lumine's light flickered rapidly. Jay descended from the walkway quickly. He entered the chamber and went straight to Minji. He visually checked her suit, noting the scorch marks on the shoulder. He looked at the fresh, glowing scar on the wall. It was precisely placed, too precise for a true accident. He turned to Voronake. The Croth cadet met his gaze, his expression unreadable behind his faceplate. "Cadet Voronake," Jay said, his tone not angry, but utterly flat. "You will accompany me to the station's maintenance locker. We will inspect your tool. The rest of you, the exercise is concluded. Return to the docking bay and wait. Minji, you will come with us to give your account." No one argued. The other students turned and left, a quiet, tense group. Juan looked like he wanted to say something to Minji, but she gave him a small shake of her head. Jay led Voronake and Minji through a different, narrower corridor away from the others. He did not go to a maintenance locker. Instead, he stopped at a small, isolated observation module, a room with a large window looking out onto the stars used for private comms. He cycled the door lock. Inside, it was silent. Jay pointed to a spot in the center of the room. "Stand there, cadet." He then turned to Minji. "Wait outside the door, please." Minji looked from her instructor to the massive Croth cadet. She nodded and stepped back into the corridor. The heavy door slid shut with a solid thunk, leaving Jay alone with Vornake. The Croth cadet took off his helmet. His gray face was set in a defiant expression. "The tool will show a faulty regulator. It is a known issue with this batch." Jay also removed his helmet. He placed it on a small table. Then he did something unexpected. He reached down to the leg of his environment suit. From a long, sewn-in pocket against his boot, he drew out a narrow object wrapped in a simple, dark gray cloth. He did not look at Vornake. He began to slowly, carefully, unwrap it. "We are not here to talk about the tool," Jay said, his voice quiet in the sealed room. The cloth fell away in Jay's hands, revealing not a modern weapon, but a simple, polished blade about the length of his forearm. It was a knife, but like no knife the Croth cadet had ever seen. The metal was a cold, smoky gray, and it caught the starlight from the observation window in a dull gleam. The handle was wrapped in worn, dark leather. It was an object of ancient purpose and quiet beauty. Vornake tensed, his warrior's instincts immediately assessing the object as a threat. He shifted his weight, ready to react. But Jay made no move to attack. He did not even hold it in a fighting grip. He simply held the knife flat on his open palms, presenting it almost like an offering. "This," Jay said, his voice as calm as if he were pointing out a star, "is a tanto. It belonged to my great-grandfather." Vornake stared, confused. This was not about discipline, not about the accident. "A primitive weapon," he stated, his tone guarded. "Why show me this?" "Because you think the lesson is about the tool," Jay said. He looked from the blade to Vornake's eyes. "The plasma cutter. This knife. You see only the object that can cut. You do not see the hand that holds it, or the reason why." He stepped closer, still holding the knife flat. Vornake did not retreat, but his eyes were locked on the steel. "My great-grandfather carried this during the war on the divided peninsula. The war from our lesson." Understanding began to dawn in Vornake's eyes, mixed with suspicion. This was a trick, a story to make a point. "He was a young soldier," Jay continued. "He fought at a place called the Nakdong River. It was a last stand. If that line broke, the war was lost. They were hungry, tired, out of ammunition. For days, they held the line with little more than this." He nodded slightly at the knife. "He carried it not because he wanted to kill. He carried it because he promised himself he would use it only so that others, his family far away, would never have to see such a thing. It was a promise. A line he drew for himself." Vornake was silent now, listening despite himself. This was not the history of victors and conquests he was taught. This was the history of desperation and promises. "They held the line," Jay said. "And later he sat in a frozen trench and he cleaned this blade. Not because it was bloody, but because the act of caring for it reminded him of his promise. To protect, to endure, not to attack." Jay finally moved, turning the knife so the flat of the blade caught the light. When the war stopped and the talks began, he kept it. A reminder of the cost of the line, the cost of peace. He looked directly at Vornake. "You asked why I told a story of a draw. This is why. Because my great-grandfather's war never ended. The paperwork just made the screaming stop. The line is still there. My family on both sides of that line still live with it. They look across and see not an enemy, but a mirror, a reflection of what could have been lost entirely." Jay took one more step, closing the final distance. He did not raise the knife. Instead, he placed it gently on a small console between them. The steel rested there, a silent, solid thing. "You have been taught that strength is for taking, for winning. I am teaching that the greatest strength is for holding. Holding the line. Holding your fire. Holding your anger. Jay's eyes were unwavering. What you did out there was not an accident. It was a test. You wanted to see what we would do. Would we cry? Would we shout? Would we run for help? Voroneke's jaw tightened. He could not deny it. You wanted to see if we had a line, Jay said. So now you see it. It is not drawn in plasma on a wall. It is drawn here. He tapped his own chest. And it is drawn in the memory of a river, and a frozen trench, and a promise made by a scared young man with a simple knife. We humans, we have learned to draw steel so we would remember the cost of using it. So we would choose every time to hold the line instead. The Croth cadet looked from the ancient blade to the human instructor's face. He saw no fear, no bluff, only a profound, settled certainty. It was the same expression Jay had worn every day in class. Voroneke had mistaken it for softness. Now he saw it for what it was, the same unyielding stillness as the metal on the console. Restraint, Voroneke said slowly, the word feeling strange in his mouth, is not the absence of strength. It is the full presence of strength, under perfect control, Jay finished. You have excellent control, cadet. You hit the wall, not Minji. You wanted to send a message, not start a war. That is a start. But the next lesson is learning that the strongest message is sometimes no message at all. Voroneke stood there for a long moment. The hum of the station's life support the only sound. He had come in expecting a reprimand, a punishment, a confrontation of force. He was not prepared for this offering of painful history and quiet steel. What do I do now? The question left his lips before he could stop it, softer than he intended. You understand the tool, Jay said, nodding at the knife. Now understand the hand. And when we go back out, you will apologize to Minji. Not for a malfunction, for your intent. And you will mean it. Jay picked up the tanto again, rewrapping it with the same deliberate care. The lesson was not in the drawing of the steel, but in the putting of it away. He slid it back into its pocket against his boot. Come, Instructor Park said, picking up his helmet. The others are waiting. The door to the observation module slid open with a soft hiss. Instructor Park J stepped out first, his helmet under his arm, his face as calm as ever. Behind him, Cadet Voroneke emerged. The Croth's usual rigid posture was still there, but something was different. The defiant set of his shoulders was gone. He moved with a heavy, thoughtful slowness, as if carrying a new weight. Kim Minji was waiting in the corridor, her helmet off. She looked from Jay to the Croth cadet, unsure what to expect. Voroneke stopped in front of her. He did not look at the wall or past her. He met her eyes, a gesture Croth warriors reserved for equals or respected opponents. Cadet Kim, he began, his voice lower and rougher than usual. My action in the chamber was not an accident. I directed the plasma discharge to test your reaction, to test human reaction. This was a dishonorable tactic. It endangered you to make a point about strength. I apologize for my intent. The words hung in the corridor air. They were not the hollow, procedural apology from before. They were specific, direct, and carried a clear admission of fault. Minji was stunned. She glanced at Jay, who gave a small, almost invisible nod. She took a breath, finding her diplomat's voice. Thank you for your apology, Cadet Voroneke. I accept it. He gave a single, sharp nod, a Croth sign of settled business. The three of them walked in silence back to the main docking bay where the rest of the class waited. The tension in the bay was thick enough to feel. Li Huan was pacing. The Helionites were clustered together, their many arms moving in quiet, anxious patterns. The Lumine's light was a steady, watchful pulse. All eyes locked on them as they entered. They saw Minji walking unharmed. They saw Voroneke's subdued demeanor. They saw Jay's unchanged calm. Before Jay could speak, Voroneke addressed the room. His voice carried. My action was a deliberate provocation. Instructor Park has corrected my understanding. There will be no further tests. A ripple of surprise went through the alien students. A Croth cadet, publicly deferring to a human instructor? And not after a fight, but after a private talk? It was unheard of. The Lumine student, who had been paired with Voronezh earlier, drifted slightly forward. Its voice was a soft chime in all their minds. The emotional resonance has changed. The conflict pattern is resolved, not suppressed, transformed. It turned its shimmering form toward Jay. You showed him something true. Jay simply said, we had a conversation about the purpose of tools and the weight of history. The class was dismissed to return to the academy shuttles. The usual groups were broken. The Kroth cadets did not cluster together. Voronezh walked slightly apart, deep in thought. The Helionites buzzed with theories about proper disciplinary protocols. Juan fell into step beside Minji. What happened in there? He whispered urgently. I don't know exactly, Minji whispered back, watching Jay's back as he walked ahead of them. But it wasn't a punishment. It was a lesson, a different kind. On the shuttle ride back, the silence was not uncomfortable, but full of thought. The alien students watched the humans differently now. They watched Minji, who had stood her ground. They watched Juan, whose engineering mind was clearly trying to solve the puzzle of what could change a Kroth's behavior so quickly. And they watched Instructor Park, who stared out the viewport at the passing stars, his hands resting quietly in his lap. Rumors began before the shuttle even docked. By the next class session, the story had spread through that wing of the academy. A human instructor had faced down a Kroth cadet with no weapons, no shouting, and the Kroth had backed down. The details were wrong. Some said Jay had disarmed the cadet. Others said he had recited ancient war poetry. But the core fact remained. Something powerful had happened in that isolated module. When the students entered the classroom for their next lecture, the atmosphere had shifted completely. There was a new respect in the way they looked at Jay, and a wary curiosity in the way they looked at their human classmates. Voronezh took his seat, but now he listened. He truly listened. When Jay spoke about communication barriers, the Kroth cadet's eyes were fixed on him, no longer with challenge, but with analysis. When Minji offered a point about cultural context, he gave a small nod of consideration. The Lumine student, during a group exercise, gently probed the edges of Minji's mind, not to intrude, but to understand. It shared a feeling, an image it had sensed from Jay in the corridor after the event. Not an image of a knife or a battle, but of an old man's hands, weathered and kind, carefully folding a dark cloth. A feeling of profound sadness and deeper resolve. Your instructor carries a deep river inside. The Lumine pulsed to Minji. Not a wall, a river. It is very heavy. Minji understood then. The strength wasn't in being a fortress. It was in being the bedrock under the river, unmoving, enduring, shaping the flow of events without trying to stop them. The other alien students began to re-examine every previous lesson. The lecture on restraint, the parable of the divided peninsula. They started to see the connections. They realized these were not just theories. They were reports from the front lines of the human experience. This was how humans fought when they did not wish to destroy. They fought with patience, with memory, with an unbearable will to bear the tension of an unresolved peace. The galaxy had thought it was a simple classroom. Now, they saw the human instructor had not been teaching facts. He had been quietly, steadily, drawing a line. And by drawing that line within himself, he had shown them all where it was. The steel was not in the blade he showed Voronezh. The steel was in the choice to put it away. The lesson was finally beginning. The final class of the semester arrived. The students took their seats, but it no longer felt like the same room. The air was clear, focused. The Kroth cadet, Voronezh, sat straight, but his arms were not crossed. His hands rested on the desk, open. Kim Minji and Li Huan sat with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The alien students, the Lumine, the Helionites, the others watched Instructor Park J with a new kind of attention. They were no longer waiting for information. They were waiting for understanding. Jay walked to the center of the platform. He did not turn on any displays. He did not need to. Our last case study, he said, his voice filling the quiet room. We return to the divided peninsula. He paused, letting them remember the images of the old war, the peace village, the line. The war did not end with a victory parade, he said. It ended with soldiers putting down their guns in a place called Panmunjom. They drew a line, and around that line they created an empty space, a demilitarized zone. It is not a garden. It is not a city. It is a scar, for kilometers wide, cutting across the land, filled with wires and watchposts and silent, untilled earth. He began to walk slowly along the edge of the platform, making eye contact with one student after another. For over 150 years, that scar has held. Not because of a happy peace, but because of a perfect tension. Two armies, still there, still watching each other across that empty space. They have stood there, watching, for longer than any of your species have been part of this academy. A soft murmur of surprise went through the room. 150 years of standing still? It was an unimaginable timescale for a conflict. It is the most heavily armed border on that world, Jay continued. And yet, within the scar itself, life has returned. Birds nest there. Animals live there, safe from hunters. Forests have grown in the minefields. The place meant for death has become, by accident, a sanctuary for life. He stopped and looked at them all. This is the final lesson. The victory is not in the fighting. It is in the holding. It is in the daily, grinding, exhausting choice not to cross the line. It is in the discipline to stand guard for a century so that your grandchildren might only know the watchpost and never the battlefield. He turned his gaze to Voronezh. You asked if the story was a failure because there was no victor. I tell you now, the victors are the children who grew up without hearing the shells. The victors are the forests in the minefields. The victory is the scar that heals, even while the wound beneath remains. The Kroth cadet slowly nodded. He finally understood. Victory was not a moment of conquest. It was a state of being, a protected peace. Jay looked at Minji and Huan. The galaxy sees our classrooms, our diplomacy, our talk of restraint, as soft. They see the open hand and think there is no fist. But remember this, the instructor who never raises his voice is the one who has already drawn the line in his soul. He knows exactly where it is and what it will cost to cross it. That knowledge is our steel. He returned to the podium. Your final assignment is simple. Look at the being next to you. They are not your enemy. They are your potential line, your potential DMZ. The empty space between you where understanding can grow, if you have the will to hold the peace. The class was utterly silent. No one shuffled. No one looked away. This class is dismissed, Jay said, his voice gentle but final. You have been excellent students. Thank you. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the students began to rise. They did not rush for the door. They gathered their things with a thoughtful slowness. As Voronezh stood, he turned not towards the exit, but towards Minji. He gave her the same sharp nod he had given in the corridor. Then he turned to Jay. He placed his fist over the center of his chest, a full Kroth salute of respect to a recognized commander, and bowed his head slightly. He held the pose for a 3 count, then turned and walked out. The other alien students watched this, and in their own ways they offered their respect. The Helionites bowed with precise formality. The Lumine pulsed in a deep, steady rhythm of acknowledgement. Minji and Huan were the last to leave. Huan looked at Jay with something like awe. Minji's eyes were bright with understanding. Instructor, Minji began, but words failed her. Jay gave them both a small, genuine smile. Go on, he said. Your next class awaits. They left, the door whispering shut behind them. Jay was alone in the quiet classroom. The semester was over. The lesson was taught. He reached down and touched the side of his boot, feeling the solid, slender shape of the wrap tanto within. It was not a weapon. It was a memory. It was a line. He thought of a river and a trench and a promise made long ago. The galaxy had thought it was a simple classroom. They had seen a human talking of peace and assumed he had never known war. They had been wrong. The steel had been there all along, not in the blade, but in the story it carried, in the will to hold a line across generations. In the courage to teach a room full of aliens that true strength was the resolve to let a scar become a sanctuary. He picked up his data slate, turned off the lights, and walked out, ready for the next class, the next lesson, the next line to be quietly, firmly held.